Well, I am so happy to be here with Angie Baughman, the host of the Steady On podcast. Angie, thank you for joining me on the journey, Ruth, today.
Courtney, thank you for having me. I'm so looking forward to this conversation.
So we met online, and I would love for you to kind of give us a little bit of your own story. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah. So what I do, I'll start with that. I'm a pastor and a writer and a podcaster, as you just said. And that's kind of what I do. And who I belong to is my husband, Matt, and my two boys. I have two boys that are 17 and 12, and they keep me busy, of course. But I think, what I am at the heart really is a trauma and abuse survivor. And I fought those sort of titles or labels for a long time because it brought shame. But over the last some years, 11, 12 years or so, the Lord has taken me through a journey of a deep time of knowing him better and understanding his promises and how to apply those to my life. And so I say that very differently now. I am a trauma and abuse survivor, and it affects my life every day, but I don't walk around in shame anymore. And so that's kind of the heart of who I am. And I live in Southern Illinois, and my husband works in higher education administration. And that's a little piece of me.
Well, we're going to talk more about kind of some of those things that you've gone through in your life. I love that you even answered that question a little bit differently than some of my other guests, because I feel like maybe you've done that work to really be able to answer the question, not just what do you do, but really truly who are you? And sometimes when we think back, if someone said, hey, tell me who you are, you would say, well, here's my job, here's my title in the home. And you're saying, no, I'm so much more than that. And you've done that work to really define who you are. So I love that answer. You have your ministry and your podcast, Steady On. It's very much a multifaceted ministry. When you go on your website, it's like, oh my gosh, there's so many ways that you reach out to people here. So can you tell us about your ministry and what it is that you do, and then the podcast and what we can expect when we go and listen?
Yeah. So the ministry is largely Bible teaching. I'm a Bible teacher at heart, and I have a Bible study method called Step by Step. And I do guided devotionals on that. I have a step-by-step team. We do a live Bible study every Tuesday night on the Facebook group, on the Study On Facebook page. And so we have a lot of fun with that. And so there's a lot of Bible teaching. There's a couple of Bible studies that I've written, and my weekly newsletter includes, we always do a verse of the week, and it includes that Facebook Live and a downloadable study sheet. So study is a big part of who I am and what I do. And that's really important. The podcast is really about how does this study play out? How does it unfold in our life? And so I say the podcast is about where God's hard truth meets our hard story, because we look for the promises of God. We look for the lies we're believing in our hard story, and the places where the enemy is stealing our joy or tempting us to believe things that aren't true about who God says he is or who he says we are in him. And so I bring on a lot of authors, speakers, ministry leaders to share their story, their God heart given message, and in hopes to just show us this is where I've been, and this is what God's doing in my life to help me get stronger in my walk with him.
And how wonderful to be able to get a glimpse of where you can be. Yeah. When you're in the midst of something. I know, looking at other moms and seeing that they have successful relationships with their sons, and that they have a little bit of freedom in their life. As a young mom, sometimes you can feel like, oh my gosh, it's just like kids, house. But to see other moms have a little bit of freedom, it's like, okay, I know that day is coming. Or when you are in a point in your marriage that's really difficult, and to see a relationship that's effective and flourishing because they stuck with it and because they did the hard work, you're like, okay, this is worth it, these steps, and it's all worth it.
And one of the things that I hope the ministry really does too, Courtney, is help people be more grace offering to themselves in the process, if you
Oh, I
will,
like that.
because, I walk in so much more freedom, and I have terrible days still too. That's a
Mm.
reality. And I think we all do, if in our mothering, in our marriages, in our friendships, there are days we feel like, man, I'm winning. Right. And there are other days that you feel like, man, I suck at this. I don't, and we are equally loved and cherished by God in both of those days. And
Yeah.
as we grow, how do we shorten the distance between feeling like we're failing if we happen to do that to ourselves, and realizing, no, this is a bad moment, but it doesn't negate all the work and healing that we've done as we've walked together.
That's right. We're not going to allow one moment to define who we are. Yeah. I think
try
that's
not to
important here.
anyway.
Maybe for like a 24-hour period.
Right. Yeah.
Get out of here. When you are kind of going through these steps of helping someone to know how to study, I love that, because I think that's something that doesn't always come naturally. What is your like one tip for someone that's like, man, I really want to study the Bible, but I don't even know where to start? Where do you tell people start?
I say take it slow and realize that this is a journey, and stay at it when it gets discouraging, because it will get discouraging. If you're looking for a resource, one of the reasons that I created this step-by-step method is because I taught inductive Bible study for years through Precept Ministries. I don't know if you're familiar with Precept.
Oh, I love Precepts. I love inductive. That is my jam. Yes.
So I taught dozens of Precept Bible studies through the years. And one of the things that I heard all the time was people saying, I really want to study like this, but I don't have the time, because if you've done Precept before, it's like, sometimes it's 45 minutes, an hour a day. A lot of people don't have that kind of time. And so I developed something that can help you get deep into the word, but it uses apps on your phone, and it's not the kind of time commitment that something like Precept is, but it's still a very deep dive. We just use one word in one verse of scripture, and we go really deep for life application. Cool. And I say all that because my goal in doing that was, how do you find something that gets you in the word and keeps you in the word? And so my encouragement, my tip would be, not my Bible study method, maybe some other, but find something that you can stick with, that's reasonable for you, and stay with it. Carve out time in your schedule. It doesn't just miraculously happen. You might have to get up a little bit early. You might have to shorten your lunch hour at work or something. There are things. What are you willing to do and move and change so that you can create the time, even if it's a small amount of time? Consistency, in my opinion, in the word is much better than big blocks of time, if you will.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was just going to say, consistency is better than something that you can stick to on a consistent basis is the best way.
Yes. And find what does that mean
like
in your life in this season? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love when you can figure out ways to, if you're having a hard time finding that time alone, that you can include your kids in it. And one of the ways that we did that when we were homeschooling last year was to read the Bible through, like chapters of the Bible, and then have the kids draw what they heard. And it was cool because I'm learning right from this, and then they're pulling out other things, and then we could talk about what was it that you heard or what stuck out to you. But that is, most of the time I would do an inductive study. Yeah. But that's usually sitting quietly by myself, not with kids around. Yeah. And that just wasn't feasible in that, season of life. So
different seasons need different things, and different days in the same season sometimes need different things. I think it's good to hold on, pull on a couple of things that, some days you do this devotional, and then other days you listen to this, app or something, because that's what you can do in the time that you have. Yeah. But not to create a situation where if you don't do it this way, you don't do it at all. I think that's the important thing for me. It has been through the years.
That's a good word. I think very encouraging. Now, we talked just a little bit at the very beginning. You mentioned that you are a survivor. So what is it that happened to you? I mean, you and your whole entire family that has brought you to this point where you can confidently say, I'm a survivor?
Well, I will say in the summer of 2010, my family of four, my husband and my two boys and myself, were in a head-on car crash. and it
Mm.
rocked our world like nothing ever has. My world really, in
Yeah.
terms of something just came out of nowhere, and then everything was turned upside down. Both my husband, no, my son, my older son, and I had serious injuries. We went through 8 surgeries, and I went through 9 months of rehab. When I first was out released from the hospital, I didn't walk. I didn't go to the bathroom by myself. I didn't brush my
Wow.
own teeth. My injuries were severe. And so I had a 6-year-old who had both of his arms were broken. He couldn't take care of himself. He had to have a constant caregiver. My husband was doing everything he could, but he had his own emotional and physical injuries, not as severe, but still. And I had a 7-month-old who
Oh
couldn't take care
man.
of himself, obviously. And so he actually had to go and live with my mother for a little while. And so, Courtney, I found myself in a situation where I didn't take care of my children. I didn't
Yeah.
go to work. I didn't take care of my home. I wasn't a wife in really I didn't take care of my marriage, if you will, or my husband. I didn't take care of anything that sort of was like
Mm.
what we talked about at the beginning. What do you do? Well, all of a sudden I found myself doing nothing, except
Yeah.
going to doctor's appointments and physical therapy appointments and having more surgery and getting x-rays, and so it was a time in which it just turned my world upside down. And for anyone who's listening, it may not have been a car crash, right? But you know what it's like for your life to hit you head on. I mean,
Yeah.
all of a sudden you're just like, I don't know how I got here. And it was scary when the dust kind of settled and I realized we were in this series of a very long journey, if you will, the season of a very long journey. Then I began to really call out to God with some pretty serious questions
Mm.
of, help me understand not necessarily the reason, because I'm not big on everything happens for a reason, but help me see you because I
Mm.
believe in you. And I believe you don't leave your children. And I believe I'm your child. But right now I feel very lost and lonely. And I
Yeah.
feel like I don't know where to go from here. And I feel like I don't know who I am. And
Mhm.
it was in that place, Courtney, then that he began to work on my heart about the deeper issue, which was the trauma and abuse from my childhood. And
Huh.
it was really, I look at the car crash now and that season of sort of not quite quiet. I wouldn't quite call it that because it was just too chaotic to be quiet, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But it was this season of like desert or a little bit of wandering or just not understanding my environment anymore. I
Mm.
didn't feel comfortable in my home. I didn't feel comfortable in my skin. I just didn't know who I was or where I was going. And in
Wow.
that sort of place, I was able really to hear his voice call me to a time of, if you will allow me to do so, Angie, I will change this place. You look at all of this and you see brokenness and ashes. All you see is what you've lost right now. And it's true, you've lost so much.
Mm.
But I just felt this promise and this calling of this can also be the kind of turning point in your life where you rejoice in this time.
Mm.
And it took a long time. I do not deny it, but I now look at, because of the healing, and we can talk about that too, the healing that's come from that place, physical and emotional, as one of the greatest blessings in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, and sometimes it's that's when our healing happens is in some of our most difficult times.
Yeah.
Had you already sought healing for what had happened in your past, or was it literally like this was the heat underneath the kettle that just made it all boil over and was like, if you don't deal with it now, if you didn't deal with
Yeah.
it before, here it all is.
Yes, and
Okay.
so what happened to me was when I was 16, I was groomed and seduced into a romantic relationship with a teacher. And
Mm.
that relationship went on about 9 months. And then the small community that I lived in, when that relationship became public, and it became very public because it
Mm.
involved uh, Department of Children and Family Services, it involved the police and state's attorney and all that, the school board, so it became a very public situation. And he was a beloved teacher, as often happens in this kind of
Yeah.
situation. And the small community, I hadn't lived there a long time, and the small community just could not or would not. I won't say that I know what they were thinking, but did not, just refused to accept that he was who he was and believed the story that he told and decided it was much easier to call me a liar.
Wow.
And so I experienced a very severe social death, if you will,
Yeah.
at that time
Yeah.
in my life. And so, all of that after that, because it was like a court case sort of thing, I had mandated therapy to answer your question, but I
Okay.
was in no, I really took on the blame at 16 and then 17 years old. I really took on the blame. And if I hadn't been so stupid, this wouldn't have happened to me. And
Oh.
it wasn't talked about in my family at all. It was very much just sort of a source of, this is Angie's mistake. And so we're going to do what we can to just sort of move on. And so I
Mm.
did what I could to move on. I went to college and tried to rebuild my life, had little contact with my family, basically no friends, because an abuser isolates you, right? So by the time,
Yes.
yeah. And so I was really pretty much cut off from the things that might have offered some support. I made some very
Mm.
bad choices when I first, moved away to college with men, and just with some of my behavior choices. And so then that sort of deepened that pit, if you will, of shame. And so then, Courtney, I never walked away from God or the church, but I also
Mm.
did not believe that his call on my life was still valid. And so I began to try to work for
Wow.
his approval, if you will.
Yes.
And so I would just be good enough that it would be at least help equate, or help, what's the word that I'm looking for, like cover, the mistake that I'd made. My mistake was so big, and I was just so grateful to still be in the family, but I
Yeah.
knew I'm not like cherished part of the family anymore. I mean, I've like messed that up at 16. I just like totally messed that up. And so I needed to earn my keep here now. It's kind
Mm.
of, and I wouldn't have been able to articulate that. I didn't mean to do that, but I see, looking back, I can see how clearly I did that. And so, yes, so I
Yeah.
had some early help, I think early counseling, but it wasn't until after the accident that I began to really explore the idea that perhaps he still loved me with a passionate,
Mm.
relentless, fierce kind of ownership almost. And I mean that in the purest kind of way, that I
Yeah.
was very much still his child.
What a worth, a sense of self-worth that he was building within you.
Yes.
What did you learn as you were pursuing this healing, as both physically and emotionally and mentally?
Mhm.
What did you learn about yourself and about God in that time?
I, it's a process of acceptance for me. I am a perfectionist at heart. I'm
Okay.
someone that can be pretty black white. If my behavior is at all bad, then it's terrible, right? Like if my choice had
Mm-hmm.
any, if there's no gray sometimes. And so to be able to look at myself as a whole, and the good and the bad, and believe that there's worth in all of it, is an ongoing process for me. I'll be very honest about that. But to be able to look at myself with the kind of grace that I would look at my child, if one of my children had been caught up in a similar situation, the way that I talk to myself versus the way I would talk to them, and hear this invitation from the Lord to listen to him talk to me the way I would talk to one of my children, the way that he would on bad days, if you will, call me back into his lap, into his arms,
Yeah.
and also to give myself grace. We have this kind of dialogue at our house. Sometimes when I find myself overreacting to something, I can identify that now. I used to be so
Mm.
ashamed of it. And now we can kind of laugh at it. One of my boys will be like, "That's mom's trauma brain." And it's funny,
Right.
it's funny, but it's not funny. It's like deeply sad, but at the same time, I'm so appreciative. I talk to people who love me well and
Mm-hmm.
say, this is a part of who I am. And sometimes I'm going to need a ridiculous amount of affirmation, because as soon as I feel like maybe I've done something wrong or whatever, I kind of go into this, you've completely rejected me sort of mode. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's not true. There are people in my life who don't see me that way. They're not just waiting to leave when I do something bad, but
Yeah.
that's an ongoing process for me. And what I learn about him in the process too is he's not leaving me when I do
Yeah.
something bad. And I actually do better than I ever give myself credit for, I guess, is part of it too.
Well, and it sounds like if your kids are saying that's mom's trauma brain, then like you have invited them into this
Yes.
healing. Sometimes I think this like healing, we are like, well, mommy's just going somewhere. I'll be back.
Yes.
We're not going to counseling,
Right.
but we
Yes.
are,
Hmm.
and therapy. And it sounds like you have invited your kids into that. How do you do that well? Like, how do you do that and not traumatize them with all the details, but
Hmm.
also give them insight enough that they can love you better as their mom?
Yeah. I really experienced this when my son started high school.
Mm,
And because high school was where this happened to me. And even though we don't live
okay.
in the same community or something, I realized, because he's a senior this year, and I
Yeah.
realized there was this sort of like low level of anxiety that would rise quickly when the situation was right, and I'm like, this is
Okay.
about this. And I began to, Alex already knew, my older one, he already knew some of my story, and I can't remember kind of it. I've just unfolded it as the kids have asked questions,
Okay.
and tried to do something of that, like at their appropriate to their age level, if you will.
Hmm.
And when they stop asking questions, I stop selling. Sometimes you're like, well, I answer a question and then I'll say, do you want to know more about that? Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they'll say no. And I try to take them at their word,
Okay.
about that. But I really noticed that. And I began to try to tell Alex, especially like when he started dating and when he started driving and some of those big things that happen. Sometimes I would simply say, Courtney, I need to think about this your mom needs a little bit of time, because I can't separate right now what's my like trauma trigger. And I know we're going to talk about that in a second, like kind of
Mm,
what's my trigger and what's actually real in your situation. And
yeah.
so sometimes I have to bring my husband in to give me a little bit of clarity around that. Sometimes I just need a minute to pray about it. I have to be very curious about my own emotions so that I don't lay on them. And sometimes
Mm.
I do this wrong sometimes, but so I don't lay my nervousness or my anxiety or my fear on them when they don't need to carry that.
And how easily we can do that as parents, like put our fear or our anxiety on our kids. And we see them sometimes respond to situations, and you're like, uh oh,
Yeah.
I know where they got that from,
Yeah.
and it's me. Like, that the fact that they got angry at that situation, which is really not that big of a deal, is because I
Yeah.
have that same response, and they're just mimicking what they see, and that can be hard. I do love that you talked about your trigger. And I know for me, sometimes when I'm in a situation, especially when it's interpersonal, and I'm trying to figure out, how do I respond well to this person? How do I make sure that I'm not, going and making it all about me, and that we're seeing a repair in the relationship instead of, just, well, I'm going to make sure that I'm right. One of the things I love that you said, I have to figure out what's mine.
Yeah.
And for me in that situation, I have to figure out what's mine to claim, what's mine to work out internally, and then what is something that I can only work out with them. And, or, sometimes once I work it out internally, then all I have to do is go and apologize, because I realize I had no idea here. I thought I was the one that was hurt, and really you were just responding because I had hurt you first, and I had no idea. So you talk about those triggers, and you actually have created something called Talk to Your Triggers. And you were
Yes, I
telling me
have.
about this, and I'm like, everyone needs to know about Talk to Your Triggers. So explain to us what that means.
Well, sure. So I have 5 steps because I'm a detail girl and I'm a step girl. My Bible study
Uh-huh.
is step by step. These are talk to your trigger steps. And so this is just how my brain processes. But
We
yeah, so
appreciate that, because it helps us to be able to apply those steps. So thank you for that.
well, so yeah, so I start step one is recognize. All the steps start with R and there are 5 of them. And step one is recognize, which is where you ask yourself the question. I ask myself the question, when anxiety rises, what does my body do? Like, what does it feel like in my body? For
Mm.
me, a lot of times my breathing is less smooth, if you will. I can feel the tension in my shoulders. My mind kind of starts racing, and it's like my inside sort of speeds up, if you know what I mean. And so I just,
Yes,
yeah,
I
okay, yeah.
do. Everyone else is like nodding their
I
head.
got it.
All the
Yeah, I got
listeners,
it. And
I
so-
get it. Yes.
So I try to recognize, because I go to 1 Peter 5, 7, and 8, and it talks about how cast all your cares on him, all your anxiety on him, for he cares for you.
Yes.
And then 1 Peter 5, 8 talks about be alert and of sober mind, because the enemy prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. And it took me, I made a connection a while back on those things, because really, like, if I hold this anxiety, it's fertile ground for the enemy. Like, he's like, whoa, she's anxious. I can remind her of all the rejection, right? And then that'll be lashed out on my kids. But if I can be like, oh no, I am feeling anxious, and I'm going to cast that, if you will, however we do that, and not give the enemy, he'll flee if you call on the promises of
That's
God.
right.
So I think step one is recognizing what your body is doing when you feel that initial anxiety rise, which can simply mean, like for me, one of my kids could bring home a permission slip that I should have signed that day, and now it's going to be late. And all of a sudden, you know what I mean? Like, my anxiety is through the roof. And then I'm going to yell at them for, this is actually no big deal. Like, it's really not, you know what I mean? But I can really overreact to something like that. And so recognize it and call it what it is. So that's
mine was a parent newsletter, by the way, this week, that said, last week, the insect assignment forms were sent home. Please make sure that you are completing these so that you can turn them in 2 weeks. I never saw an insect assignment form. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm very nervous, right?
I was like, where is this? Why haven't you gone through this? And I had made the, now I know, mistake of allowing my son to sort through what he brings home and decide what he wants to keep and what he wants to throw away. Well, at some point, I believe he chose to throw away the insect assignment form because I didn't look through. Okay. Yeah. So I'm right there with you. But I love that you applied it to that 1 Peter verse, because I have found in the past that when I'm all worked up about things and I have to like go and have a conversation with someone, I hate conflict with every being in my body. So, of course, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to go through it in your brain. Right? You're going to say, this is how the conversation's going to go. And it never is going to go the way that you think the conversation is going to go. So why do we do that? And I have found that that anxiety will build and build and build. And the only thing that calms it down is talking to Jesus. And I have been in a situation where I'm like, God, the only thing that's going to calm my heart right now, because I can't do anything about this situation at this current moment, is talking to you. So let's have a conversation. Mm-hmm. And I'm always amazed and blessed at the change that happens in my heart once I literally cast those cares on him. Yeah. So I love that 1 Peter verse, and what a good encouragement for us when we get triggered in that moment.
Yeah. That's the earlier we can stop it, right? The earlier we can stop it, because we might hate conflict, but a lot of times we don't hate. No, we do hate to take it out on our kids. A lot of times it's a lot easier to take it out on our kiddos than it is, or our loved ones, whoever that might be in our lives. Yeah. The people we live with. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So
you're right.
Yeah. So step one's recognize. Step two, reveal. And that is, what am I believing on the inside about what's happening on the outside? And so I'll use your permission slip, your insect thing. I think a lot of times.
Okay. So let's just walk through my triggers. Let's do it.
Yeah, we can use mine if you don't.
No. Go ahead. Let's do it.
But a lot of times, like with that, what is the thing we're believing? Well, initially we may be believing, depending on what our insecurity is, they're going to think I'm a bad mom because I didn't get this done on time, or they're going to think something like that. Like, it's usually the story we're making up in our head. So what are we feeling on the inside? What story are we making up in our head that's causing this anxiety? I use John 1:5, the light shines in the darkness and the darkness has not overcome it. If we can reveal, that story, it like, if you say that out loud, I think over this bug thing, they're going to think I'm a bad mom. It kind of probably not. I mean, even to yourself, you probably think probably not. And so when you bring it to the light, a lot of times it dissipates. For me, one of it's the same song in a different key over and over again. The enemy will whisper in my ear, remember, you'll never belong anywhere. Mm-hmm. Wherever you go, they'll reject you. And so somehow a lot of the things that are happening in some way is related to that lie. If I can notice it, if I can reveal that, then I can say, that's not true. That's a lie.
That's right. And what you don't know is the episode that's coming out before yours. we talk about that verse, that exact verse.
So
listeners, I don't know what God's trying to tell us, but let's listen real close. That's right. John 1:5. There's no darkness allowed in him. So let's claim that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have number one is recognize, then reveal.
Yep. And then step 3 is remember. And this is where have I experienced God's faithfulness in previous circumstances? I use Psalm 145:13. The Lord is trustworthy in all he promises and faithful in all he does. If we can build a bank of faithfulness of God in our life, that we can draw on, deposit those memories of a different time when the enemy sang this song to me. I remember how God, begin to build that bank. You already have them, if you're walking with the Lord, you have them, but can you build them in a place that you can pull on them? Is there a favorite verse of scripture that when you read it, you almost cry because the promise is so tender to your heart, right? Mm-hmm. Those are the things to put in that bank and pull on. So when my anxiety is rising over the bug sheet and I'm believing that people are going to think I'm a bad mom, I can go to this promise that says, what is it for you, Courtney? Or, whoever's listening, that reminds me, oh no, I am his. And what this does is it realigns us with God's promises of who he is and who we are in him, because that's unshakable. It's incorruptible. Even if people do think you're a bad mom over the bug thing, that's unshakable, right? It doesn't.
That's right.
Ultimately, it doesn't matter between you and God, which is the primary relationship anyway. So remember his faithfulness and call on it.
Yeah. And I love that idea of just having those things that you can claim, because then you can fight against those lies that are going in your head. If you've got those promises and you're like, okay, but the scripture that I memorized says that I am worthy.
Yes.
So this feeling that says that I'm unworthy, it's not coming from God.
Yes.
It's not God saying oh, look how you failed. Look how you messed up.
Yeah.
That's not him speaking. That's someone else. And so we need to take that thought captive and we need to give it over to the Lord. Yeah.
Yes. And the way that we armor up, if you will, Ephesians 6, the armor God.
That's right.
For me anyway, the way that we armor up is having a plan. We know, if we've been walking with the Lord, we know these answers. We know this truth. We believe it. But in the moment of the bug sheet, and I'm sorry, thank you for that really good example. In the moment of the bug sheet, we can't fix the thing with the newsletter, right? The bug sheet, right. But we can say, oh no, I don't need to feel this way about it, and then have this sort of bad evening with my family over this. It doesn't deserve to steal that from me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're gonna just pretend that I responded well.
I'm sure you did, and I'm so glad.
Definitely did not. Definitely not. And we still haven't gotten the bug sheet, and that was 2 days ago. But I've now turned it into a learning experience for my second grader.
Aren't you so glad you mentioned it? Yeah.
I know, right? Now, I thought this was going to be a learning experience for my son, and here it is for me.
I'm so sorry. It's just something we grabbed onto, and now it's grown into a life of its own.
Let's keep going. All right. So
step 4. Okay. Step 4 is receive. And it kind of all comes together right here, because will we or will we not? The Lord, I use John 14:27, peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. He gives it to us. He promises us rest. He promises us joy overflowing. He promises us peace. And it is ours to claim. And in this moment, when we realize our anxiety is high, whatever word, stress, whatever word you want to use for that, when our soul is in chaos, sometimes I say it that way.
Yes.
And we understand this is the same lie sung in a different key today. I know God is faithful. I believe in that. And I have this, I'm standing right here, and I can hold my hand up to it and say, no, thank you. Or I can open my hands to it and receive just what you were saying. It's what makes a difference, right? When we spend some time with the Lord, will we receive what he's offering us in that moment? Doesn't fix the situation with the newsletter and the bug assignment, but it can fix what's going on inside.
That's right. And our reaction to
absolutely
what's going on, because we recognize that and we realize kind of how we need to respond to it. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And then step 5 is repeat.
Oh.
Because how do I give myself grace in this process? Because this is, the enemy, he knows where we're tender. And some days, depending on what's happened, we're not going to do this very well. We have days, we have experiences, we have trauma, we have memories, and sometimes we just do it wrong. We just do.
Yeah.
And so how will we offer ourselves grace in the process? Lamentations 3:22 and 23 talk about, because of the Lord's great love, we're not consumed. His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. And I like to Angify that and say they're new every moment when they need to be. Great is his faithfulness. And so, he gives us lots of opportunities. I think it's Matthew 14, right, where Peter walks on the water and he steps out, and it's so easy to look at that. And as he looks around and sees the waves around him, he begins to sink. And I was in that verse, that story not long ago, and I saw something new in it, because it's so easy to look at Peter and be like, why didn't you just focus on Jesus instead of sinking? Because he says, where's your faith? Will you live a little faith? But I think there's something really admirable about Peter, that when he feels himself falling, he knows what to do. Save me. He calls to the one who will extend his hand.
That's right.
And sometimes we look at the circumstances, and sometimes it happens to me before I am like, dang, I can't believe I did that again,
Right.
And then will we offer ourselves grace and ask for grace for someone if we've hurt them or we're short with them, and say, I'd like to try again. Would you let me try again? Let's talk about this from the beginning. And
and we're following Jesus' example, right? Because Jesus didn't say, well, should have kept your eyes on me.
That's right.
To be you.
Yeah, I know. I guess now
he reached out.
I'm down I'm down a disciple now. Right now. It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way.
No. No.
And I love that. I really like the steps. Like I said, we need steps. We do. It helps us. Right. It helps us to think through this and recognize. And sometimes that's my thing. I'm like, I don't have time to think through it.
No, I know.
And it's like, well, if you think through these steps almost in your own time, take some time to think about what it might look like.
Yes.
It's a practice. It's practice. It takes practice. And so I love that repeat idea of you don't just do this once and everything's fine. Mm-hmm. This is okay, we're going to come to this point again. How am I going to do this better next time? How am I going to be more successful to maybe even recognize this is about to be a trigger?
Yes.
Before it even happens.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to go ahead and walk through these steps.
Yeah.
Sometimes the trigger, however, is not something as easy as a bug, assignment, which we shall see this afternoon if we have that a bug assignment. We still don't have it. So, and I'm trying not to email the teacher, because we still have a week and a half, so we still have time to do it. I'm trying to let him take responsibility for that. We'll see. But what
we're going to need an update on the bug sheet. I'm just telling you.
I'll let y'all know.
Okay.
When this comes out, I'll let you guys know if we have received the bug sheet or not. That's right. What in that situation, I look at it and I say, there is a way that I can solve this. I mean, right now I can go and email his teacher, and she'll probably just email me the assignment sheet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right.
But sometimes these triggers are coming from a place where there isn't such an easy resolution. Maybe it's even the triggers are happening with somebody who is not apologetic, it could even be an abuser that is, continuing. How do we deal with walking through our triggers when there's not really an easy ending to this controversy?
I think one of the things I've learned to ask myself is what do I need here, and be honest with myself. I mean, for instance, my family situation is still pretty painful because this is, my past is something that has just never been allowed to speak of. We just don't talk about it.
Wow.
And so when we get together for things, I allow myself now to stay a few hours and then I can leave. Because, it's not fair to my family for me to come home feeling and small and, just gross. I don't know, I don't know the word for, but just a lot of the feelings that I would put on myself. And so how do I protect myself the best I can and offer, how do I love them well, authentically? That's really important for me, and take care of myself at the same time. And that's really hard. And sometimes we say no, even when people don't understand. But I also try to focus on the people that need to understand that I need to have like this connected relationship with, are my husband and my boys. And if we're okay, then everything else will be okay. Like that's my primary relationships. And sometimes that means maybe other people don't get it. I have a couple of close friendships, right? I mean, these women that have walked with me for 20 years, I need those relationships to be okay. And if they're not, then they need some attention. But
Yeah.
every relationship, because of things that we've been through or whatever, isn't that priority. And it took me a long time to understand that. And then also, for me, like this year, my son played basketball. He's a senior in high school, and my abuser was a band teacher. And I played in the pep band, and basketball games were a big part of my high school experience. And we shared those together. And so as I've gone to those basketball games, and the band and the basketball, like it's just a lot of memories, Courtney. It's a lot of memories. And I'm like old now and would think, I wouldn't care about that anymore, but I do. It's very, and so my husband and I have this little thing. One of us will look at the other, like we go to away games or we're at home or whatever. And we look at each other and we're like, there's a band. And it's like this little like thing in between us where, because the band can be pretty triggering for me. And I mean, a couple of times I've left crying and I just go to the bathroom for a minute and then I come back and it's okay. But I want to be able to process. It's a way to release it. Does that make sense? Where we just acknowledge this kind of is not that fun for you right now. Right. Yeah. And it stirs up all kinds of things that aren't fun at all, but I want to be present for my son. I want to, when that game is over and he's going to come out of the locker room, I want to give him what he needs, not be such a bundle of mess that I don't have anything to give. And so it's this little thing where we're like, there's a band. And my husband says, when he says that, nobody around us understands, but he sees me.
That's what I was going to say. He sees you. Yeah.
He sees my pain, and it's okay. And it helps me so much. And so what is that for you, in your, like, if it's a continuing thing, or you're going into a circumstance that, this one could be hard, then how do you help the person who wants to support you? Ask
how
for what
do you know
need.
when it's time? I don't necessarily mean like something like a basketball game or like where you're going into a situation. Let's talk more like relational. How do you know when it's time to walk away? When you're like, I know this is a trigger for me. How do you know when it's time to stay and allow yourself to heal?
Yeah.
And how do you know when it's time to walk away?
I went through this also in my time of healing, where I did have relationships that I walked away from, at least emotionally. And that was really when I won't be able to pull the verse right now, but there's a verse, I think it's in Ephesians, that talks about, as much as it depends on me, be at peace with all people. Do you know the verse that I'm talking about?
Romans.
Is it Romans? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Maybe we can look it up, but yes.
Yeah.
I think about that. And I really went through a process of trying to, for relationships that were not abusive. This is painful, but not abusive.
Yes.
Trying to,
that's a good delineation.
Yes. Abusive relationships are a whole different thing. We can talk about that too. But relationships that were painful but not abusive. And I went to both of those people and said, I would like to have healing here. And I think for me, this is what it would take. And both of them didn't want to do it, and didn't want to talk about my story, didn't want to hear what they had done that had hurt me in the past. They just didn't want to hear it. And so that was my answer, Courtney. And then how do I then be in relationship with these people, because they're family and my kids are connected with them and that kind of thing, but not need something from them? Because every time I was with them, it was like I was extending myself, but drawing back a bloody stump, if you know what I mean, and I was hurt all the time in those relationships. And so I had to learn what it meant to show up in those relationships, but not need anything from them, so that they stopped damaging me.
So you stayed, there was still that relationship there, but you just didn't invest your own emotional.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. That's how I've done it.
Yeah. Okay. Now, there was a part of your story that I think is one that so when we experience a trauma like the accident that your family
Mhm.
was in, a lot of times we can think, okay, there comes a point where we're healed and we're all together and we would rather be all together, and there's a point in your story where you talked about the healing that had to happen within your family as far as relationally, because you guys spent so much time healing your bodies
Individually.
individually. Can you
Yeah.
talk about the struggles in coming back together as a family?
Yeah, it's interesting because after the car crash, of course, we had a lot of support and a lot of help. People were around a lot because we had a lot of physical needs. But then, and anybody who's been through like a death or something knows that there's like a lot of activity at first, and then sometimes it gets very lonely, and then
Yeah.
there are weeks and months and years sometimes of healing that happens in a much quieter way. And that's what happened to our family too. My younger son, as I mentioned at the time of the crash, was 7 months old. And I was in rehab for about 9 months, and I didn't care for him on my own for a very long time, but I didn't see
Mm.
him or care for him very much at all in those early weeks. And I never held him again, like before he could crawl, or, he was crawling. I'm trying to think. He crawled about a month after the accident. And I didn't
Wow.
change his diaper for a long time. Those things that moms just kind of do and you don't hardly think about it, but those bonding moments. And
Absolutely.
and when he came back home and he was sort of mine to take care of in a different way, and I still had help every day and stuff, but he didn't want me.
Mm.
If he would wake from a nap, I would go into his, room and attempt to, one arm, mind you, because I had a damaged arm, but I was trying to figure out ways that I could be with him and could care for him, and he would just shake his head and scream, no, 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 until my
Mm.
husband or my mother came in. And then I would just retreat and sob, because
Yeah.
I had this child. I had been taking care of him. I stayed at home. I worked part-time, but I worked from home. And so I was, very much in his life all the time. That doesn't make it better to do it that way. I'm just saying, like, we were together all the time. And
Right.
then all of a sudden we were never together. And you can't know, I don't think, in a 7 months brain, what that does.
Mhm.
But it obviously did something, because
Mm.
somebody that he had trusted all of a sudden became a person that he didn't want taking care of him. And
Yeah.
rebuilding that relationship in the midst of all the other things that were going on with physical healing, and it was very taxing, and it was slow.
Mm.
And yeah, it was a real struggle for us as a family.
Wow. Did you, I mean, because you can't say with a baby that small, like, let's go to counseling together.
Yeah.
Let's go to family therapy.
Right.
Was there help with that, or was it a matter of time? How did you kind of work through that process?
For us, it was time.
Mm.
It was time in my own healing of giving him time, because my instinct is to rush things and fix them. And
Is that not everybody's?
I don't know. I
'Cause
just
I'm
want
right
it
there
done.
along with you.
Yeah. And there was no doing that with Josh,
Mm.
my little one. He was going to come around to me or not come around to me. Now I did, I did, for some of the family members who would immediately sweep in when something got hard between he and I, because I had a hard time maneuvering him because of my physical limitations at the time. And very well-meaning people would be like, I'll just change his diaper because it'll take me forever. And sometimes 3 diapers. And, we get poo all over the place because I can't, I'm trying to do it one-handed
Yeah.
and he's around, and I did at one point say, I know it's hard to watch me do this. I have to do it. Like, he and I have to
Mm.
do this together. He would prefer that you do it. I
That's
would
right.
prefer that you do it. You would prefer that you do it. I have to do it.
That's right.
And so that was a stance that I kind of took, because I just had this sort of like mama bear instinct of, I'm not going to let go of him. Like, I
Mhm.
just, there was
Mhm.
something in me that I'm like, this is a hill I'll die on, if you will. Like,
Absolutely.
I'm not going to give up on this. I'm going
Yeah.
to fix this or die trying, and or heal it. I guess that's probably a better word than fix. And so, yeah, so there were some things
Mm.
like that, but mostly it took time. Yeah.
Yeah. Man, and what a beautiful testimony for him, as he gets older of, I fought for our relationship.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
I it was hard, and there was no way that I was going to let you go.
Mhm.
There
No.
was no way that I wasn't going to make sure that our relationship was what it needed to be. And I hear even in your oldest son, you know, of like going to the basketball games, there was no way that I was going to allow what happened to me to disappoint you.
Yeah.
And that can be, they talk about how parenting is hard, and that's not the part they talk about.
Yes.
About how sometimes your kids are going to bring up some of the hardest parts of what you've gone through and some of the hardest things. And then you have to deal with it.
Yeah. You know, and I think that's part of it. You know, my biggest thing is rejection, you know, and not belonging and all that, and to experience that from my own child. That's not where I thought that I would get it. You know, it's just not ever where I thought I would get
Absolutely.
it. But, you know, to have to sit in that place and say, basically you're facing your worst fear, that people you're depending on to not go away or wanting to go away. And so what do we do? You know, what are we made of? And it's not me that's made of anything. I wouldn't have like quoted this at the time or anything, but the 2 Corinthians 12, that talks about how, you know, it's in our places of weakness that God can be made strong. You know, I couldn't do anything like that in my own strength. I wasn't physically strong, and I certainly wasn't emotionally strong. But there was just something inside me, Courtney. I mean, it's just my stubbornness. I don't know, but there was just something inside me that was like, I have just survived a head-on car crash, and I'm in therapy multiple hours a day, and I'm trying to get stronger, and I'm not going to get stronger just to lose you, you know, in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you say that mama bear instinct.
Yeah.
I'm going to fight for this.
Even if I'm fighting you, right? Like
just to get your diaper on.
I know, but I'm not. I may show it like, you know, like with Alex and his basketball, you know, there are times that maybe I show up imperfectly here, you know, because I'm upset by just the memories and stuff. And maybe there are times at that season with Josh that I showed up imperfectly, because we did both end up with poo all over ourselves. You know, this is not great what we are, but I am here and I'm not leaving, you know, and so we're just going to sit here with the poo on us until we can figure out how to get it off.
And it's not the perfection that they need, right? It's in our imperfection that they see our love the most. It's in our imperfection that they see how we're fighting for them, how we are working hard for them. It's in our imperfection that because when kids only see perfection, that's what they think the goal is.
Yeah.
And then when they can never achieve it, now we have children who have an issue with, how am I worthy? I can't be perfect. But when they see us be okay in our imperfection, they go, mom can have grace for herself. So I can have grace for myself and my mistakes. Yeah. And we really try, you know, when we respond negatively, to apologize to our kids. But then also, so it starts with an apology. And then to talk about, yes, you did something wrong, but now we're going to talk about why this was a big issue. And going back to the bug example, you know, you're in 2nd grade, but there's going to come a day where the teacher is, I'm not going to get a parent newsletter home. And if you don't bring that assignment sheet home, I'll have no idea.
No idea.
And then you'll get a 0.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that's going to affect your grades, you know, and so talking about like the greater impact, but not in the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
But afterwards. And I say this not because I'm perfect here on this platform, not because I'm like, this is what we always do perfectly. No, like I said, I did not respond well to this parent newsletter. Now, what piece of advice would you give to a mom who is coming out of a time of trauma? I think you've given us a lot of things, but if you could give one piece of advice to her, what would it be?
I think seek support. Whatever that looks like in your life. You know, is your husband a person that you can have these conversations with and say, I think maybe sometimes I'm overreacting and it might have something to do with some of the ways I've been treated. Can you get into some counseling that you feel good about? Do you have a spiritual mentor? Do you have some close girlfriends that can just walk it with you? Just figure out the best you can what would be helpful and ask for it. You do not need to do this alone. I mean, the Lord promises, Joshua 1:5, I will never leave nor forsake you, which is both a physical leaving and an emotional leaving. Like, you know, but how does he, and this is something that I rejected for a long time and I didn't mean to, but how does he not leave nor forsake you with skin on? he puts people in our lives
Mm.
that will help us understand he doesn't leave nor forsake us. And so will we not necessarily be accountable, but will we invite them in to this process and find people that we can be vulnerable with and say, I've hit a spot that's real hard right now.
And that is a beautiful moment of inviting people in, because there's such a vulnerability that comes with that. And it's not something that's necessarily celebrated.
No.
In culture, vulnerability is definitely not celebrated.
No.
So we have to intentionally make that choice.
Yes. And if you try and it doesn't go well the first time, if you try to deepen a friendship or open up, or if your husband doesn't know what to do with it at first or anything like that, it doesn't mean you're wrong to ask. And it doesn't mean they won't come around. It's really hard to ask. And, and so I just really encourage someone, community is a very hard thing for me to trust, but it's something that the Lord has worked really hard to encourage me. He doesn't work really hard. He continues. He's persistent. I guess I'll say that about encouraging me to not do it on my own, because I think it's easier for me to do it on my own, and he knows it's not.
Right. And in that moment, when you are bringing people into these, this trauma that you're trying to heal from, sometimes it's kind to them to give them a little bit of time to process.
Yes.
Because you've been sitting in this trauma.
Yeah.
And you want to bring them in, but sometimes it can be like,
yes.
What?
Yes.
And allowing them to talk to their triggers for a second.
Yes.
And find kind of an equilibrium back in their self, and then they can help you.
Yes.
And sometimes that can be hard, because their response may not just be super graceful, because they're just learning this.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even with counseling, if the first person, if you try some counseling and the first person isn't a good fit, it's okay if they're not a good fit. It doesn't mean counseling is not a good fit for you. That can be a journey also. And it can be frustrating, because you just want, I'm finally willing to look at this a little bit closer or whatever. And then you might face some resistance or something, but but it's okay. You're worth taking the time to find the right people to share your story with. You're worth that.
You're worth the time. You're worth the time. Well, we here at A Journey of Ruth, we always say, we're not meant to live life alone. So that word that you're preaching there, we believe it. We claim it. We agree wholeheartedly. Before we move on to our final question, where can we find more about your ministry and find you?
So my website, thank you. Yeah, my website's a good sort of hub, if you will. That's livesteadyon.com. And I have some free resources and all that kind of good stuff. And I'll send you a link, Courtney, if that's good. And you can stick it in your show notes and they can find me there. Yeah. And
one of the things you have is a free download with all of these Talk to Your Trigger, the 5 points, right?
Steps and scriptures. Yes. And it'll be in that link also. Yep. It's just a Talk to Your Triggers download, I think is what it says. Yeah.
Awesome. So if you're driving and you were thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't have a chance to write any of that down, or you're on the treadmill at the gym, just go and download it.
That's right.
She's already got that for you.
Yes.
Well, the final question that we ask every episode is, who has helped you along in your journey?
Yes. Multiple people, but I would say I have 2 lifelong friends. Their names are Lisa and Maria. The 3 of us have been friends together for over 20 years. They help me out on the podcast sometimes. They're on that step-by-step Bible team that I talked about. And they, don't make me emotional. They have been friends when I was a hard person to be friends with, because I just was really caught up in legalism and perfectionism. And I did and do have very high standards for myself. I've gotten a lot better about not laying that on other people, but I haven't always been that way. And those ladies have believed in me. We used to go to Women of Faith events. I don't know if you're familiar with those or whatever, we would go to Women of Faith and they would say, someday we'll work your book table. And I'd be like, shut up. I don't even know what you're talking about, but, and we still have this, 20 years later, we still have this, and I email them sometimes. I'm like, I need you to work my book table. And it's like this sort of, it's just a phrase that we use because they're so supportive of the ministry. They've been so supportive of me. They've been so supportive of me telling my story. They've known my story a lot longer than other people have, I mean, I talk about it openly now, but that hasn't always been the case. And they have also called me on some pretty difficult things in my own walk, because they've earned the right to do that. Right. They've earned the right to speak into my life and say, I think you're not in a line with God's will in your life in this particular area. And those things are really hard to hear, but I can hear them from them. And That's so right. They're my cheerleaders, but they're also my, what's the word? They're the truth tellers. That's right. As well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. What a blessing to have friends like that love you.
Yeah.
In the good times and the bad, that support you wholeheartedly, even though they know all of the dirt about you.
Oh yeah.
I have friends that will sit next to each other in Bible study, and they'll say, talk about one time when you, when God called you or God called you out on something and asked you to change, and you said no. And we look at each other. It's like, do you want to tell mine and I'll tell yours?
Exactly. Yeah. I love these women so much. I mean, as you can probably tell, Courtney, and your listeners, like, I can be a lot. I can be a lot. And they have dealt with my a lotness for a long time.
That's beautiful. But we all need that. And we can all be a lot, especially with our closest friends, usually, and so I think that's important to have those people. And that's why discipleship and good Christian community is so important, because we can encourage each other and push each other on in our weaknesses and in our strengths. And I just think it's a beautiful picture. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for all that you've spoken to us today, the tools, these lists that we can take and say, oh, I can take this and apply it in my life, and hopefully see an end to this bug situation. So thank you for that. We really appreciate you being here on the journey of Ruth with us today.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share. I appreciate you.
Absolutely.